Thanks, and hi everyone. My name is Amal. I work at Magenta. We're an amazing team of passionate social and behavior change experts, and I'm here to tell you about our work on supporting demining efforts in conflict-affected areas. So let me tell you first what I'm talking about here. I think most of us here have watched war movies and seen pictures of bombs, missiles, and heard stories about unexploded warfare. These could be bombs, shells, grenades, and other munitions that did not explode when they were employed and still pose a risk of detonation, sometimes many decades after they were used or discarded. But what we're talking about today here is mostly improvised explosive device, or what we call IED, which are not necessarily that kind of sophisticated warfare. It's not the classical warfare that we know, but it's mostly homemade explosives that are well hidden and especially never easy to spot or identify, which makes them extremely lethal. Where most of us live, we don't often think about mines. I mean, we have been thinking about them recently, haven't we? We don't think about explosive devices, but in some of the countries where we work, they are incredibly widespread, and quite often injuring women and children. In 2020 only, the number of victims of explosive mines rose to 7,000 casualties. 80% of those were civilians, and many of whom were children. At Magenta, we are working alongside our partners in this area, and specifically 4 countries. First one is Mali, where the civilian population accounts for half of the victims. Then comes Syria, where almost half of agricultural lands are contaminated. And what I mean by contaminated here is the presence of actual explosive ordnance. Afghanistan, where renewed access to some territories added to the risk since the Taliban seized power. Afghan casualties represent a third of the total number of casualties in the world. And lastly, Iraq. Iraq is one of the most contaminated countries in the world, with 3,000 kilometers of its surface contains mines and other explosive ordnance. 3,000 kilometers, that's the size of 2 Londons. So think about that. When you look at these numbers of casualties, I want you to imagine who they represent. Young kids playing in newly contaminated lands, women going to the market, or even truck drivers on their way to work. And these are not isolated incidents. They're happening on a daily basis. So I guess the question now is, how do we save these lives? The most obvious one is demining. It is efficient. It should be carried out as much as possible. But demining when and where possible is not an easy task. Specialized organizations do remarkable work in this area, but sometimes the constraints resulting from the security and sensitive political context do not always allow for action. Local authorities can themselves be caught up in power politics that prevent them from demining contaminated lands. Their activity then becomes politicized and does not allow for effective demining operations. This is where risk education steps in. Risk education represents not only an additional solution that should always come in hand with demining efforts, but sometimes is the only solution when demining is not possible. In this presentation, I will take you through some of the most fascinating insights that we have come across at Magenta, how we use them to build effective communications to try and help people's lives. First of all, we are truly convinced that social and behavior change expertise, when applied to risk education, is a game changer. Understanding what are the positive and risky behaviors, the drivers and barriers behind them is key to embed impactful and life-saving risk education. So when we talk about positive behaviors, let's see in what we're talking about here. We're talking about walking the main road that is not contaminated. We're talking about not touching suspicious objects. We're talking about not necessarily going to help someone who's injured. And we're talking about also alerting the local authorities when we are spotting danger. Certainly right now you're thinking that these behaviors might seem quite obvious, but don't be fooled because they are very hard to adopt. These are not the easiest behaviors to adopt in the conflicted areas where we work. So when we talk about using main roads, for example, these might be risky and people avoid them. So just a couple of months ago, I was in Bamako in this workshop, and one of the participants was explaining to me that the truck drivers will not take the main roads. they will not take the secondary roads because there are the bigger chances for them to get carjacked or kidnapped on the secondary roads. So they prefer to take the option of maybe walking on the mine or driving by it. Being afraid of touching suspicious objects could not be well perceived in some cultures. Taking risks is perceived to be heroic, and that reputation is very socially rewarding in Mali, for example. So understanding why people, understanding why people are not adopting these seemingly obvious behaviors is the key for us to make them adopt them and not die. So we do work across different contexts, and they have many differences, but we've come across a few similarities, and that's especially when it comes to audience segmentation. The following audience segmentation is quite relevant, mostly always. The first group would be the unaware. That's the unaware group, those who do not know about the danger of explosive hazards. These are usually returnees, internally displaced population, or truck drivers. Second group is the uninformed group, those who do know about explosive hazards, but don't know about safe behaviors. Then comes the misinformed, and these are the children, adults, and the elderly group. Third group are the misinformed, those who have been given information about safety or believe they are highly informed, and these are generally former soldiers, fighters, ex-miners, scrap metal dealers. Then come the reckless, who know about mine safety but ignore this information, and these are usually young boys playing around. And lastly, the intentional group, those who have no option but to intentionally adopt unsafe behaviors, and these are male youth or adults collecting items because they will be buying them after. So when we look at the psychological, environmental, sociological insights, we come across some quite mind-blowing insights. We hear things like, my destiny is not in my hands. As a Tunisian, I can relate to that because we have that sense of fatalism. Some of us think that our destiny is written somewhere in the stars, and there's nothing we can do about it, so why bother? We hear also things like, I have limited options for how I can make a living and provide for my family. Or, it's very important for me to be part of a group or be accepted. I think all of us can relate to that one. We, as BC experts, are constantly confronted with challenging insights when it comes to risk education, but the toughest one so far is probably this one. Not dying is not my #1 priority. So how can you go from there? How can you answer that when you're building your recommendations? I think the simple answer could be, save a life now, build a life later. We know that using positive, emotional, inspiring, and educational messaging, we will help people better understand the value of prioritizing safe behaviors above others and times more seemingly pressing factors. And the core idea here was intentionally echoing to the Quranic teaching, which says, whoever saves one life is as if has saved all humanity. So we understand here that the ultimate priority of people's lives is something we must be cognizant of at all times. It positions our messaging to counter fatalism. In Mali, we were conducting some research amongst a quite diverse set of ethnic groups. And one of the most common insights was within the reckless group. Remember, the young boys who are playing, wandering around their houses and exploring new territories, exposing themselves to risks because that would make them perceived as heroes. So what we recommended in our strategy was to redefine who true heroes are. The true heroes in Mali are the ones who are actively trying to be safe, to protect others by promoting these positive behaviors. And you can all imagine what's possible in the realm of communications when you talk about superheroes. Basically, superheroes, comics, can save young children's lives. In Afghanistan, we developed this entertainment radio ad using engaging storytelling. And we partnered with very local Afghan radios that help us develop the dialects, the scripts in the local dialects. The ads delivered messages around traveling safely, safe behaviors after recent attacks and conflicts, and encouraging parents to protect their children from explosive hazards. A large audience exposed to explosive ordnance education engaged with the messages on a regular basis, and therefore had an increased capability and motivation to practice safe behaviors around explosive hazards. These are kind of the messages that we have conveyed through the radio ads. You can see that 74% of our messages were about do not touch foreign objects. That's as easy as it is, but you need to say it and repeat it and to tell it to everyone. In Syria, we developed a gamified application inspired by the children's favorite book, Choose Your Own Adventure. The process has facilitated a user-generated experience by allowing the audience to pick their own path. For instance, the user was able to select their gender, age, and the content that was shown to them was considering their profile. So the approach has allowed for a targeted and interactive experience for the user, keeping them better engaged in the learning process. Also, this app was the first risk education application that was in Arabic, and since most of those are in English, obviously, that was a game changer as well. We all know that entertainment can be a powerful lever for risk education. In Iraq, we created a TV series that puts women in a position traditionally occupied by men. So this gender approach was not only a way to fight traditional gender stereotypes, but also a way to approach the issue of risk education through entertainment. This approach that has proved its worth and which, above all, makes it possible to cover the whole range of population concerned by risks is in the sense that women are also exposed and potential victims of explosive ordnance. So now, when we talk about impact, as I've started the presentation about saving lives, and you're expecting me maybe to give you a number of how many lives we've saved, that is not an easy question. And while some casualties are still being killed by explosive ordnance, we cannot talk about success. It's not great. So it remains to track how many lives have been saved through our risk education interventions, but we know that our content has reached millions and millions of citizens across these 4 countries. So it is not possible to measure the number of lives that have been saved, and this requires also to know in advance who would have been a victim of an explosive ordnance. However, what we do know, for instance, is that in Afghanistan, for example, 90% of the victims have never been exposed to any risk education content. Through our project only in Afghanistan, a partnership with the local radios, we had almost 800,000 people that were reached by the campaign. The project has also strengthened the CSO, civil society organization skills, and local actors who then became this relay of information and awareness to the populations under their responsibility. And that has reduced the number of victims. In Iraq, the drama series that we have produced reached more than 6.6 million people on social media. And the social media posts only, they had an audience of more than 35 million people, which increased the dissemination of the good messages and the safe behavior content. Lastly, you can help. If you're interested in helping, you can donate to UNMAS. UNMAS is the United Nations Mining Action Service. They depend on donations, so yes, you can help donate and increase the activities of risk education. If you want to get in touch, that's me, that's our website. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I discovered that you'd actually worked for 5 years in Oberdi in Tunisia, which I, as a quick plug, is actually one of our most magnificent offices. It's always been an absolutely fantastic creative beacon there. So it's really good to welcome an alumnus on board as well. And I'll just have just a few questions. Is this actually on? Because it needs to be unlocked. That's the only problem. If you can unlock that for me and bring it back. But honestly, I mean, one of the really important points here, by the way, is that there are really, really important activities of this kind which you'll never be able to measure the effect of.
True.
And one of the things that slightly worries me about the cult of quantification is that I worked in direct marketing for many years, and the great thing about direct marketing is you could measure. The downside is you were never allowed to do anything that you couldn't precisely measure. And I think it's perfectly well possible. However, your point that actually 90% of the victims had never been exposed to the message, if that is then disproportionately high, it's impossible to correct for all the variables. But nonetheless, that's indicative And I
Exactly.
think it's highly indicative.
Exactly.
The other thing I think that's really important is the role of the of edutainment.
Yes.
So, the role that soap operas can play, the role that narratives in, for example, telenovelas can play, can be an extraordinary form of persuasion simply by example and storytelling without actually ostensibly being a piece of persuasion at all. Are you planning to do more of those, as far as you can, more media partnerships?
Yes, actually, at Magenta we do not only work on risk education, but we work on education, health, gender issues, and we saw that edutainment is always the most impactful type of content. People project themselves in those characters, they start relating to them, and that start changing their own behaviors. It's the best way to challenge social norms as well.
There's a really interesting story from Latin America, which is they tracked the spread of telenovelas across certain parts of Latin America, and it absolutely coincided with the reduction in family size. And the irony of this was that the wealthier families portrayed in the telenovelas tended to have fewer children, which just set a social norm of having smaller children, possibly associated with wealth. It turned out this was not intentional at all. It was simply that the people who made these programs found it a pain in the arse recruiting child actors. So they got the script writers to write in smaller families simply for the convenience of making the thing. It had no social purpose when it was actually done. But I think that's really potent. The app is interesting also because it's a very clever way of getting people to self-target.
It's gamification, isn't it?
Gamification.
It is gamification, yeah.
Gamification actually makes personalisation rather easy because it's actually done by the participant.
Exactly.
What are your future plans? What do you see as the next big priorities?
I think for us the next big priorities are really, I'm working on Africa and Latin America, is really supporting more countries and more partners across both continents. But our teams across the world, they are really supporting these very important matters. And I think our priority is always to stick to the truth and be the voice of the actual insights and build actual efficient communications and interventions and provide that authentic research and just link the people to the truth.
Because you mentioned, there's a great question here from the fabulous Louise Ward, which is, one of the things you spotted is the absolute problem that young male bravado causes in so many settings. And I think that's a persistent thing. But Louise asks, how important is it using a cultural lens to come up with behavioural solutions?
You cannot do it without a cultural lens, and that means sitting with communities and consulting them and co-design solutions with them. We do not design things and solutions for people, we design them with people. So yes, having that cultural lens, being there on the ground actually, and having the local staff as well, that would give you the nuances. You and me were talking about foreign languages yesterday.
Yes.
And I was telling you, I think the importance of speaking a foreign language is not actually the jargon, it's the silences, it's the unspoken words. And you need that to understand what's not being said. You need to be able to read it between the lines. So yes, Louise, having that cultural lens is absolutely crucial.
And then the other problem someone's asked here, actually anonymously, no reason for them to be anonymous, obviously one of the problems is these are not people who are generally the target audience for large numbers of advertisers. So as a result, the number of media supported to reach those people is correspondingly low. How do you overcome that problem that they're in many cases not just an under-advertised group, or they're almost very hard to reach by definition?
You get creative, isn't that the sense of very creativity? It's not depending on channels, but finding the right channels. So because again, we sit a lot with communities, and there was an interesting insight in Mali, for example, where the level of literacy is quite high. We saw that the insights when we were studying the media landscape, that the number of use of WhatsApp was high. And we're like, that does not make sense. And one of the focus groups, or the key informant interviews, respondents was telling us that's because they send vocal notes.
Of course.
And that insight is a game changer, isn't it?
Of course.
So we started recommending building content that is sent.
So audio content sent through WhatsApp.
People do not read, but they can record themselves and send those messages on WhatsApp.
Fantastic.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that occasionally, but that's out of laziness, I might add. But a very interesting question here. Someone's asked, have you ever attempted to communicate with the opposing military? Or is that considered? In other words, is there a solution?
The question would be why
people doing it in the first place?
Because that means that, because you're considering that they are ready for dialogue.
Yeah.
I think when people have arrived to the point of violence, they're not interested in dialogue, are they?
No.
So it's really about saving people's lives and actually focusing on the potential victims.
That's absolutely fantastic.
And it's not our job either, it's the job of other organisations, but yeah.
And what's probably the favourite, wonderful last story, what's the favourite thing you've done?
Recently?
Yeah, the thing you're most fond of. Is it the voice notes? I think
it was the voice notes. I think being able to action such wonderful insight and see it happening, it's amazing. Because in our job, we see the impact. Yeah. And that's really great.
Well, Mal, I don't want to keep you from your work any longer, okay? Because I think there are more important things you can be doing. But we're just going to lead to a commercial break here. Thank you very much indeed. Just one favour. If you want to keep Nudgestock free, click the like button, because the algorithm likes it, and click the subscribe button too. The algorithm likes that, and unlike the like button, it's actually useful, because you'll get notified of future content from Nudgestock whenever it becomes available.